Hello, YouTube. I'm Vince White. I'm an employment attorney, and on this channel, we answer publicly posted questions from YouTube users, getting folks the answers they need from an employment attorney. We have a question here from YouTube user Almost There, who asked, in general, do attorneys prefer email or voicemail to communicate with their clients? All right, so I prefer about 90% email. But whenever something is tricky or substantive or like requires a conversation, it's got to be a call, right? Um, and a lot of times it'll be a call, and then I'll follow up with an email to memorialize it. So the beauty of a phone call is you can first and foremost tell when somebody doesn't understand what you're saying, right? You can spend 5 minutes conveying like a complex thought, like, hey, I'm worried about your case at trial because of X, Y, and Z. I'll give you an example. Hey, I'm worried about your emotional damages because your doctor says you're full of shit. Your doctor says, no, your emotional damages are not tied. The anxiety, your physical symptoms are not tied to what happened at work because the timeline doesn't match up. Just an example, right? And the client will be like, no, it's connected. So in real time, the clients said to me, I don't understand what you're saying. Right? I'm saying, hey, your doctor, who is a professional that we require to testify about this as an expert witness, says no. Says that this thing you're experiencing is not tied to what happened in your workplace. And went a step further to bury this portion of your case by saying, yeah, the timeline doesn't even match up. And what the client said to me in response was, no, which we can translate as, I don't understand anything you just said. Right? Because you can't say no. That's not, you don't get to just bury your head in the sand and be like, no, that's not happening. You don't get to do that. That's not how this works, right? We're going to trial, and you have to understand, you can make a decision that I don't like. That's fine. But you have to understand. And that's the point of a phone call, is you can stay on the phone until everyone understands. Everyone doesn't have to agree, right? But you can't even think about agreeing until you understand. So in that scenario that we just discussed, I can hear, oh kiddo, you don't get it. Okay. And then you can have a conversation, be like, hey, let me clear half an hour for you. Like, let's start with how emotional damages get calculated and how they can get proven at trial, and like have a discussion. And we're going to overlay the facts that we just talked about, your doctor specifically saying you're full of shit, into this process. And we're going to go step by step so you understand how properly fucked we are in terms of your emotional damages, right? And listen, client has choices. Clients have agency. You work for the clients. The client can be like, I don't give a fuck. Don't tell me. I'm not going to listen to you. And then you got different conversations. You got problems at that point, right? Or the client can say, fine, I can't guarantee you it's going to change my decision here, but I'll hear you out. I want to at least understand the process because it's something that I need to understand in order to make an informed decision, which is all you can ask for, right? Like, you can't, as an attorney, I always get so mad at attorneys. Like, I'm going to drop your case if you don't take the settlement that I want you to take. Well, I don't agree with that. 99 times out of 100, I don't agree with that, right? If the settlement's higher than you could hope to win, as per how the law is written and how damages are calculated, we can talk about that. Or if it's a settlement where the client agreed to the settlement and then was like, oh, they gave me exactly what I asked for, change the deal, like that's a situation too. We can talk about that. These are separate things, right? But here we just have, the clients deciding about whether or not they want to take some settlement. We don't even need to get into what the settlement is or go to trial. And we're like, okay, well, let's look at the damages. Let's look at how the settlement offer stacks up next to the damages. Let's say hypothetically, your economic damages are a little bit low. So we're looking primarily here at your emotional damages. And your emotional damages are not in a good place because your expert witness issued some written opinions saying you're a liar, right? And which happens. A lot of people talk a big game, and then their doctor comes in and like, So everything this person said is false. That happens. That relatively common. Doesn't mean the case is false. Doesn't mean the discrimination or the sexual harassment didn't happen. What it means is you got a little excited when you were describing your damages in terms of your emotional damages because, frankly, you didn't understand how they're calculated. You didn't, right? There's a lot of the average client doesn't understand that, right? So what the phone call lets you do is understand and sit in the pocket and be like, but you still don't understand. And that's going to frustrate the client, and you're going to frustrate the client. You're like, okay, let me listen to you now because you're frustrated with me. Let me hear you express your frustration. I hear your frustration. I share your frustration. However, your frustration doesn't change reality. We have a couple of realities we have to deal with here. One, you don't understand how this is calculated, so you can't make an informed decision. Two, you're saying things because you want them to be true, not because they are true, right? Three, you're failing to properly assess risk, and you can embrace that risk. You can take the risk of trial. I'm on board for that. That's great for me. I'd do it even if it wasn't great for me, but it's great for me, right? The risk of trial is generally almost always worth it for our firm because what you can hope to win at trial can be really great, right? The problem is trial's often not right for the client because, the risks could be super high and they only get one of these potentially, right? You only get one workplace discrimination case, at least hopefully, right? And so rolling the dice on like a 1 in 10 big win is tough. It's tough when you only have one. When you have 450 a year, when you have more, I think, than any other firm in the country, well, it gets a little bit easier to roll the dice, right? At the end of the day, we know we're going to make it up in aggregate. We know we're going to be good, right? But it's tough on the clients. You got to have this conversation in the phone call with the back and forth. And those conversations can be arduous. They're not fun conversations because the client's going to be like, I understand. I'm an adult. I'm an educated person. I make lots of money. And you're going to be like, yeah, okay. But you don't make lots of money in this field. And you don't, like the things you're saying demonstrate that you don't understand. You don't understand the basics of what's going to happen 2 months from now in trial when your doctor comes in and says, yes, that is my patient. And yes, I did write an opinion about that patient's emotional damages. And yes, that patient is a liar, pants on fire, who's dumb as a donkey, because he or she got in the stand and said a bunch of things weren't true, knowing full well that I wrote an affidavit saying he or she is full of shit, right? This is bad. This is a bad thing, but this is a fight that clients routinely cannot get into their head, right? And in an email, if I was to tap an email to my client about that, only one possible outcome. Only one possible outcome. Client rages and wants to fight you, and like you have a problem. You're no longer together in unity of interest trying to fight against the employer. You're now adversaries with your client, right? That's not going to work in the email. Also, the second worst possible outcome of an email is the client just says, oh, sure, I understand. Thanks. Do it my way. And you don't know the client doesn't understand. Because the client thinks she or he is a super savvy PhD, I got my big hat on and my degree, and just doesn't grasp that, like, your degree's in, like, liberal arts, kiddo. Like, it's not, my degree's in history. You know what a history degree does in terms of understanding employment litigation? Not a goddamn thing, right? I think my degree is actually in, like, prehistory, because I didn't want to remember dates, right? And my minors from undergrad didn't help me either. Japanese and philosophy. And philosophy maybe a little bit. But at the end of the day, like, education is not necessarily going to apply to understanding what's happening in an employment litigation unless you have specifically been educated about employment litigation, right? You could be like, I've routinely represented attorneys who, some of them are amazing. Many of them fully grasp what they're facing. Some of them do transactional stuff and they don't grasp litigation at all. And they're just like, really excited to be like, boom, lawyer. What? Wait, what? What did you just say to me? Like your literal career is to comply with the Canadian blue sky laws around investing, and you're trying to like hold forth on the issue of employment litigation in an entirely different country. Like, what? Your understanding level is a zero, right? Like, and that's important on a phone call. You can stay in the pocket and keep going until you reach understanding, right? Like, once somebody understands, then you can accept the decision, right? Once the person really is like, okay, that is what you're describing with my doctor going in and testifying is going to be a big hurdle, a big risk factor at trial. I now grasp that. Thank you for investing the 6 hours that it took for me to understand that. Thank you. While I understand that, I want to embrace that risk. I might be sitting there like, that is not a good decision, but I can accept it. I can accept that decision now because the person understands. The person is no longer just saying versions of reality that they wish were true, which is very common. That is a behavior that humans routinely engage in. Weird to watch, sad to watch, but it happens all the time. It happens to all of us. I'm sure I do it. I'm sure I say things that I hope are true in situations where I don't have to deal with reality, right? Like, maybe in situations where I have to deal with reality. Like, I'm making decisions about something, this and that, and I'm just saying things I want to be true. I'm sure I do it too. I'm not mocking these clients. I'm saying this is the thing that human beings do that we as employment attorneys have to be like, okay, but no. No, there's verifiable reality and there's your wishy reality that you wish was true. And these things have very little overlap. Very little. And we need to understand how they're not overlapping so you can understand that your worldview is improperly informing your decisions. And that can only be done in a call, not an email. Now, that being said, I will often follow up with an email after a phone call so there's a record, right? Like, for instance, somebody's like, hey, what do you think we should demand? And I'm like, listen, I think you should open with a positional demand of like, let's call it 8 years of your average earnings here in this particular situation, just hypothetically. Often, if I don't follow up with an email, a couple months later, people are like, you guaranteed me 8 years. And I'm like, literally, I said that was an opening demand and that you would have to negotiate down if you want a settlement. And their memory will be like, I was guaranteed 8 years. No, again, we talked about that's an opening demand. It's positional. You need to negotiate down if you want a settlement. If you don't want a settlement, that's cool. Go for broke. Go for trial. We support you. But nobody guaranteed you anything, and any attorney who guarantees you anything in this field is a liar and a cheat and should go to jail, right? But you follow up with an email because human beings, in our minds, begin to believe things we want to be true. And when they say, you guaranteed me 8 years, I can say, here's the email where I, again, told you that we discussed a potential opening demand of 8 years, but we were clear if you want a settlement, you're not going to get that much. And sometimes people are confronted with those emails and they say, oh yeah. And sometimes people are confronted with those emails and they say, I hate you. And both outcomes are okay. You just have to accept that you're holding people to reality. And sometimes that's going to make them angry. Like that's a reality of this industry. Is that often as people coming into the case who haven't lived it, who don't have this deep feeling about the case, we come in and be like, hey, listen, we do think there's discrimination here, but also you're kind of a dick. Like, the discrimination is real. You definitely have a case. But like, just a bit of an asshole. And it really comes through. Like, we're worried about the jury seeing the footage of you being so shitty to everyone. And that's not going to feel great for that client. And boy, you don't want to do that in an email, right? What you want an example you can do in an email? Hey, here's your discovery schedule. We need to schedule your deposition. What's your availability over the next 2 months? Right? Like, that's a good thing for an email. 90%. You want to provide a factual update? Email. Amazing, right? There's a lot of people who just want to have calls every day, and you can't. That's not a thing. You can't do that. Like, we're not your daily driver in terms of your your download mental state. Like we're not gonna be like, oh, we're sorry you had bad eggs for breakfast today, but like let's talk about the case. Like that's not how this works. But in terms of the substantive complex conversations, always phone calls. Always a phone call. Everything else is an email, 90% email. And if you have an attorney who never wants to put anything in email, I have concerns. I have concerns about why that attorney doesn't want to put anything in email. Frankly, right? The emails are in part there to protect the attorney and to provide a framework, a record of the reality of the situation. And attorneys who don't want that, I have questions. I have questions about why they don't want that. So still rising. No. So almost there. I apologize. I got the wrong YouTube username. I was looking at the screen. I hope this answers your question. I hope it was helpful. If it was, like, subscribe, comment down below. If it was not, tell me how I fell short. I will track the comments down below. And remember, everybody works. Not everybody wins.